I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. And this month, we're going to be looking at the face of the French New Wave and one of the most influential directors of all time. I'm talking about none other than Francois Truffaut. So, if you guys are new to the series, what I do every single week is or every single month now, but I used to do it every single week, but every single month I go a huge deep dive and sort of 30-minute video and talk about a director's filmography. I talk about the central idea of what makes them great, and then I also look at what I consider their best, my favorite, and the most underrated movie of their filmography. And this week, I'm super excited to do Francois Truffaut because I hadn't really explored the French New Wave at all. I knew it was this whole big sort of film movement, I knew I had to get into it, and I thought that Francois Truffaut was the most sort of heard of. I thought him and Jean-Luc Godard decided to go with Truffaut in that sense. And I mentioned a bit about the French New Wave and the 400 Blows, but I'll remind any viewers that didn't see that episode. Essentially, the quick rundown is that the French New Wave is a film movement that occurred in France in the 1960s, where a bunch of critics wanted to change the way movies were sort of seen and decided to make their own movies. This was a time of a lot of experimentation. There was many different types of unusual things that they were doing that eventually led into very much modern day techniques that are still used today. Some people consider the birth of cinema in France in the 60s because it really changed the art form in that sense. Very unusual techniques at the time, at least, things like long takes or unusual editing or addressing current social issues that some Hollywood films, but particularly not the French studio films of that era, weren't doing. So it came out of the sort of rebellion in that sense and very much sort of embodied the 60s kind of counterculture, and then really sort of inspired the 70s film movement, the auteur movement in the States. So this is really a great starting point and a great film history sort of lesson for myself. And Truffaut definitely is the face of it. He's probably one of the most prolific directors where he sort of outlasted the French New Wave. There were some directors who were known for that style and couldn't really evolve out of it as the times changed. Plus his film, The 400 Blows, which I talked about on the last Old on Old episode, was released in 1959, and that was really the start of the French New Wave. It was the very sort of first popular one because it was so different than so many other previous films. And then of course in 1960 you have Breathless, and then his other films, Shoot the Piano Player, and then Jules and Jim. These really sort of prolonged the French New Wave's popularity and really sustained it as a predominant film movement because it was so revolutionary for its time. And Francois Truffaut was one of those critics who eventually turned into a great movie director. And what I love about Francois Truffaut and his movies is that he's more than just the face of the French New Wave. He's an incredible director. I said an influential director before. He's influenced many directors, English language directors as well, not just sort of French directors. And what I love about him is that he makes two things. He makes romantic pictures, movies about love and relationships. He's definitely a romantic filmmaker. But also what's really more interesting, what I found, is that he's a very personal filmmaker. Now, I talked a little bit about that in the 400 Blows episode, but I'd like to explain a little more. It might be an odd statement to say he's a personal filmmaker because I don't know him personally. So how would I know he's personal? Well, it seems like everything that he is thinking, he put it out on the screen. And this is found, I think, through the details. There are certain details throughout his movies that can't be achieved otherwise. There are some directors who create incredibly intimate scenes, but there's a certain honesty and a certain reality that he brings to his movies that, it's confirmed by a lot of the stories he's given that a lot of his movies were very personal, but even his less personal movies, he's always able to give something and of his own experience and really put it into the movie. And in that sense, he really is a true artist, and his movies are definitely all his own in that sense as well. But really, it is those little details that make it personal. I'm going to take a quick scene from the Soft Skin, which is a movie I personally did not like very much, but there has some great stuff in it. And there's one scene in particular that was very different than most sort of arguing scenes that I've seen in a long time. So there's a fight with a man played by Jean Desalé, and he's having an affair with his wife, and this is a scene where right after where his wife knows he's having an affair and sort of confronts him about him on the phone, and this is the first time they're interacting. He tries to sort of slyly sort of sneak into the bed, and then there's a shot of the woman who knows he's there and then says a couple things, and you can sort of see her about to say something, and there's this really unique look on her face where it's almost like as if she's prepared a speech, like she's been almost rehearsing this because she knows about it, or she's been thinking about it ever since he's come home, because it was the day before that she sort of confronted to him on the phone. And it's a really interesting sort of look at just this split second of she's about to have this speech, and then once she really gets into it, she totally sort of goes off the rails in a sense. It escalates actually pretty quickly, but then there's something that's different about this one. Normally, most movie scenes, they'll start quiet, and then eventually they'll escalate to the climax, and then the movie will cut, leaving us in this sort of dead sort of space. We know, oh wow, this is really emotional. What Truffaut does, he keeps the cameras rolling. He lets the sort of full argument play out, which is why I feel like it's a little different. So once the wife sort of escalates things very much, then things start to slow down. Then you have sort of glimpses and regrets of happiness, thinking that the possibility of it's going to work, and then there's more sadness, and then once again it builds up again and there's more anger, and then it's so much anger that the wife, you can see she's almost trying to evoke and really sort of poke, I guess I'm trying to figure out the word, but like sort of not entice, but sort of provoke is what I'm trying to think, provoke the husband by almost making him feel bad in a sense, and sort of what I liken it to is she's almost telling a guy on the side of a bridge, jump, you can't do it, you're gonna jump, right? But in this case it's divorce, we're gonna have a divorce, threatening it, and then she doesn't expect him to sort of have the response that he does, which is, fine, we'll do it, fine, She sort of wants to push him so far that he retreats back, but then it fails, and then this great moment where her face on her, the look on her face really drains, because now it's official, She knows that this is not good for her, but she still loves him. There's still an incredible amount of love there that you could tell through this scene. And there's so many different movies like this. I actually liken this as similarly to Before Midnight, an incredible movie in the incredible Before trilogy series. That really looks at this sort of thing and, talks about how, lets these fight sequences go on sort of longer than it expects it. And I think this is actually a great example of all of his movies. So many of his movies we feel like we're looking into someone's life, that it's almost too personal. We're not supposed to be there. With Soft Skin example, it's almost so personal and so honest and so different than so many different arguing scenes. It feels like real life. It's the cadence of the conversation. It really feels like a real life conversation, and it's very intimate in that sense, but almost too intimate, and that's like a lot of his movies. You feel like you're peering in on someone's life. You feel that you're not supposed to be there. You feel like you're not supposed to watch this, but then again, you're so engaged. You don't want to turn away, but you're not supposed to be watching. And really, I think this is what makes actually Truffaut a filmmaker for me. Very love and hate. I love a lot of his movies, but I don't like a few of his movies, because I find that the distinction is in something like the 400 Blows. Antoine, he's a flawed character, but we understand his motive. We understand why he thinks the way he does. But then in something like The Soft Skin, I didn't like it because there was no redemption of the characters. So I think if Truffaut is able to build enough good in the characters so that we know the characters are good, but they're doing bad things, then I'll enjoy the movie. But if we have a bad character and then he starts doing bad things, it's hard for the audience to really relate to him. Sometimes I like the anti-hero, but the anti-hero's charming or has a fascinating point of view. But when you have sort of these boring sort of characters and sort of character traits, and then they do bad things, it's less redeeming and sort of harder to watch, and not necessarily as much enjoyable the way I think maybe Truffaut wants it to. But I think that's what makes him sort of an amazing filmmaker. He puts his heart out on the line and goes for something, and you really love it. And sometimes I have incredible film experiences that I've never had before, but other times, they just don't work for you. But that's okay, because there's so much good in all of his other movies. And I think Truffaut, above all, is this romantic, very personal filmmaker, unlike any filmmaker I've ever seen before. And it was really interesting to sort of understand what makes him great. And I think those two things are really the keys of what make him great. But now I'm going to move over into what I consider his best and my favorite movie of his, Jules and Jim. So I do want to start by first saying that because I'm doing my best and favorite, and because Truffaut's an interesting director, I'm actually not going to do an underrated. I know in a lot of episodes, my best, my favorite, and my underrated are sort of three different movies, so I can talk about three equally amazing movies, and Truffaut definitely has those in his reservoir, but I think I'll be lying to the audience if I say, The 400 Blows may be his best, and if I didn't do that on Old, I'd probably do 400 Blows for the best, and Jules and Jim for my favorite. But I really think that Jules and Jim is one of his best, and is also my favorite. And then for the underrated goes, there was actually not a lot of Truffaut films readily available online. I was a little disappointed with that. So, I did watch a substantial amount of Truffaut films, and I think it's still relevant enough, and I still have enough information to do the series and continue on with this episode. But for the rest of this episode, I'm only going to be talking about one movie, which is the best and my favorite, which is Jules and Jim. Just in terms of the Truffaut thing, because the films online, because some of them aren't available at all, so you have to find them in the theater, which unfortunately there's really none like those near my house. And then also, if they are streaming online, they don't have English subtitles, so it was a little bit of a challenge there, but I watched as many as I could, and like I said, I definitely watched a substantial amount. But transitioning over into Jules and Jim, this is such an incredible movie because it's a movie I highly recommend to everybody, yet I constantly found it a struggle to talk about why I loved it. I had a really amazing experience watching this movie, guys. I felt it was such a unique movie, a movie I've really never seen before. And by the time the end of it, I went on this sort of emotional roller coaster, and it was hard for me to express the feeling that I had and sort of the journey I went through to get it there, and I'm trying to think why I like it. But really I sort of pointed out and sort of nailed down a few things that I enjoyed about it that I'm going to talk about now. But Jules and Jim, if you don't know, is about these two friends, Jules and Jim, and their life, and then so they start off the movie with them two, and they're just enjoying life, and we understand the two characters, and we really get an instant bond with these two characters. We understand that they're friends instantly, and what's really great about it is that even though their names are similar, the two J's, we know who's who. Jim being a very sort of American name despite being a Frenchman, and then Jules being an Austrian man, they look very different. One's much shorter and blonde, the other has a mustache and dark hair, and he's tall. So there are distinct differences between the two. Very unusual actors. That it's one of those things where you're looking through the filmmaker's filmography, and if I look at someone like Akira Kurosawa, I see Toshiro Mifune multiple times, but someone like Jim, or even Jules, Oscar Werner, who I haven't seen before in any movies, it gives them that instant recognizable thing that, oh, this is a real person. This is not an actor that I've seen before playing a part. If you know an actor, sometimes it can take you out of it in that sense, right? So I found that Jules and Jim, first of all, the two pairings of the friendship instantly have chemistry. We understand that they're friends, but they're very different people, not in terms of their looks, but also in terms of their personality. They're very different in the way they act, and how Jim is very much a ladies' man, and Jules doesn't have as much luck, but he's always out there. And once we see sort of the Paris life and understand the backstory of all the characters, then Jules brings home and sort of has a new girlfriend. Her name's Catherine, who's played by the brilliant and talented Jean Moreau, and she brings a very unique energy to this movie. She's unusual. She's unlike any other girls. She's impulsive. She's very outgoing, and definitely unabashedly her own. She's not trying to impress anyone. And Jules says this multiple times. I've never really met anyone like Catherine. The Parisian girls aren't like this, and you can tell that immediately because of how much energy she brings. So, and really, this first half of the movie, we see Jules and Jim and Catherine and their sort of adventures through Paris, and it's got so much fun into it. There's so much energy. It's a very joyous time. I'm thinking of the scene of them on sort of that bridge area where we have the sort of fast tracking shot, which was really incredible, and just the relationship and their dialogue, the time when Catherine tried to dress up like a man, that sort of whole sequence, that whole scene, how it plays out. It feels, in a way, Truffaut allows us to feel like the sort of youth, the experiences that I've had before, where there's not a care in the world. We don't have to worry about these things. We never worry about money or relationships or family. You know what I mean? We're just living life, and they found this really unique girl, and they just want to spend all the time with her. But then, what the film really does is shows two different types of the movies and uses the World War I as a breaking point that shows a huge transition in their friendship and in their life. And I actually liken this to Boogie Nights in that same way, where Boogie Nights, it has the 70s, it's fun, and then there's that party, and there's that suicide with William H. Macy's character, and then boom, we're into the 80s, and it's a huge sort of tonal shift. Things are different now, just with that sort of change of decades in that weird way. And this same way, it almost is the perfect relationship movie, because you start off with all this great happiness, and then we start to have a little bit of the bumpy roads, and that's symbolized by World War I, because Jules being an Austrian and Jim being a Frenchman, they are on different sides of the war in World War I. So if you know history, you know the different sides, so they're constantly sort of worried about killing each other, right? And really, before the movie, it's so much joy, and they were really boys at the time, but now after the war, they're men. It's not a drastic change necessarily. We could understand that there's still these characters, Jules and Jim, but they haven't seen each other for 4 or 5 years because of the war. So when they go back to each other, there is sort of a disconnect until we start to ramp things up, and there's definitely been changes. Jules has married Catherine, and they have a little daughter as well. So that sort of brings a whole unique aspect to it. And this second half of the movie is when things get a lot more complicated. Not Inception-like complicated in that sense, but complicated in the way that it's not a storytelling complication, but a complication in terms of love. Love is thrown out there, and this is when we really get into the relationship part. Before, it was happy and fun, and everyone just sort of liked each other. But now we're getting into what really love means, which is sort of accepting your partner through these tough times. And we talked about it a little bit before in the sort of fun and the outgoing times of the first half, where Jules is not sure if he wanted to marry Catherine. Is she the wife type? And we see in the second half that she's not. She's impulsive, and she doesn't like sort of the monotony of being a mother and sort of having to care for her child, and always wants to go to the next best thing, which leads to a lot of sort of interesting choices by Truffaut, and that's all I'm going to say, because really what Truffaut does is at the beginning of the movie, he really allows us to enjoy these characters and understand why these are such fun, sort of unique characters in that way. But then in the second half of the movie, the characters start doing a lot of selfish acts, but because of the goodness in the beginning, we understand them. We understand that they're good people and that they can be redeemed. Some people see Catherine and her sort of more selfish acts in the second half to be where the film breaks off for them, but I think that's what sort of makes it unique. There is the fun times in there. The fun times is the stolen kisses of Truffaut's movies. Have you seen that movie? That's also a great movie, but it's for the most part fun times. And this second half is more like soft skin. It's more of a drama. But Jules and Jim is the best and my favorite because, and almost really the ultimate Truffaut movie, because it combines those two elements that he does so well. And now, I talked about Truffaut being a personal filmmaker. This is not necessarily personal in a sense that there are personal moments, but it's almost sort of Truffaut thinking about his life and his love life and what he wants to do, and really playing with this amazing character in Catherine. I mean, she's really the center of the movie because she tears these two guys' world apart. They seem like inseparable friends, but then love gets thrown around, and who loves who, and the confusion is there, and sort of if someone can love you but they don't love them, is it still worth staying in the relationship for? Or now with the addition of children, and then and also a period piece in that sense. So what's the societal sort of reasons of marrying this one woman, even though she has a kid? So there's a lot of things going on here that I really enjoy sort of looking into and exploring and asking myself, because the two characters of Jules and Jim, we see them have this amazing friendship, but then we see them get torn apart, and then is it worth it? And there's all these different sort of questions, and Truffaut has this really amazing scene that I haven't really been able to get out of my mind, and it's a scene between Jim and Catherine, and they're sort of just strolling down the the field of their home. They live on the countryside and of France, I believe, and it feels like there's all the time in the world. He just holds this long take, and they sort of just wander through the park, and they talk about all these different things. And she talks about her relationship with Jules, and talks about how she feels about Jim, and they just go back and forth, and it's sort of elegantly done. There's so many great long takes in 400 Blows where you feel just wandering around. This is sort of that implemented into it as well. It's a great sense of, we're just wandering through the fields, just the way they move and how he walks is so well done, and how he just sort of allows us to really take in this conversation despite it having so much stressful and sort of plot implications and story implications. It really allows us as just a free-flowing thing. We feel like we're part of this group. We feel like we're the third friend, and just sort of peering into it, or maybe, we just really feel like we're a part of this unit, I'd say. And it just, once you start mixing the ideas and these themes of love and sex and becoming adults and fascinating characters, really, I think you just want to spend more time with them. I know it's maybe a little confusing for you, but it's hard to explain my experience because it's unlike any other film. I was really floored by this movie, and I implore all my audience out there to check out Jules and Jim. I'm not sure if it's the best. I'd say 400 Blows would be the best sort of starter for Truffaut, maybe then Stolen Kisses. But definitely check out Jules and Jim. I think it's an incredible experience in a movie that talks about relationships in such a unique way that I haven't really seen before. It really blew me away in that sense, and I was really a big fan. But anyways, guys, make sure you comment below. Let me know some of your favorite Francois Truffaut movies. If you sort of like this shorter format, I just did the shorter format this week because I only talked about that one movie, and because, unfortunately some of the movies are a little bit, it's hard to find. Tell me if you're enjoying this Masters of Controlled Chaos series, if you're enjoying the longer formats, or if you'd rather me do it a little shorter, a little more like old on old. Let me know in the comments down below. I also have a podcast out, Connor the Contrarian, so you can check that out. I'm uploading weekly. It's a podcast series where I talk about movies that I liked, but the critics or audiences didn't respond to. It's a lot of fun. But anyways, guys, I'm Connor Old, and until next time, stay tuned.